Next, on Currents News, the Pope's Amazon document is finally here, but the world still doesn't have an answer about married priests or women deacons. We have team coverage. American troops under fire in Syria. The story is still breaking. The latest is ahead.
The NYPD, a Queens parish and community gathered to remember the life of Detective Brian Simonson 1 year after he was killed in the line of duty. I'm Tim Harfman, and I'll have the story.
Plus, the push to save a giant piece of history in Brooklyn, a possible underground railroad stop, one of the last before freedom. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. The Pope is giving a thumbs down on ordaining married men as priests for the Amazon, and he's sidestepping women deacons altogether. Those are the big results from his apostolic exhortation that came out this morning. We begin our team coverage at the Vatican. Melissa BUTZ is in St. Peter's Square.
Months after the October Synod on the Amazon, the Pope has decided married men will not be ordained priests in the Amazon region. This announcement is part of Pope Francis's reflections and conclusions from the Amazon Synod, contained in a text called Querida Amazonia, or Beloved Amazon in English. It rejects the proposal for married priests made by more than 2/3 of the bishops who participated in the Synod.
Una frase di San Paolo VI. Preferisco dare la vita prima di cambiare la legge del celibato.
Despite the shortage of priests in the Amazon region, the Holy Father wants more frequent masses so people in the most remote areas can receive the Eucharist. The Pope's solution is for Latin American bishops to encourage missionary priests to go to the Amazon so they can better understand the region's cultural realities and serve as shepherds. Additionally, Pope Francis does not mention the possibility of ordaining women as deacons and rejects the idea of women becoming priests, saying this could narrow the Church's vision. He instead praises women for all they have done and many roles to keep the Church alive and calls their contributions indispensable. The Pope's main focus in his text are his dreams for the area, socially, ecologically, culturally, and ecclesiastically. Pope Francis insists on greater participation by laity in sharing the gospel and, most importantly, growing in holiness. The document is first and foremost a love letter by Pope Francis to the Amazon. It takes up themes like exploitation and injustice, his concern for the poor, protection of cultural diversity, and also safeguarding the natural wealth and beauty that makes up the Amazon region. At the Vatican, Melissa BUTZ, Currents News.
The Holy Father's apostolic exhortation is jam-packed with important information, and here to sort through some of the major highlights is the national correspondent for the Tablet and Crux, Christopher White. And Christopher, why did the Holy Father decide not to decide on the hot-button issues of married priests and women deacons?
Yeah, there was so much anticipation, and now, some people are saying, what, No, I think the Pope has a number of plausible reasons. One, the Pope himself has expressed unease with this in the past over the years. He just says, before he makes something such a bold move, he wants to discern it further.
Right.
As we've seen him do with women deacons in the past, he's had a commission on that. He's going to, he said at the Synod's conclusion last October that he's going to relaunch that.
Okay.
I think it's quite plausible we'll see something like that on the question of married priest.
Okay.
Also, one of the things that he really has emphasized both in the original final document and again in the exhortation is the fact that he wants the church to carve out and embrace a new Amazonian rite within the church. And I think that is sort of the space in which he perhaps wants to work those questions out.
All right, so what are the reactions so far to what Francis has written?
Well, okay, there were people on both sides that were both sort of cheering this on, and also those that were anxious about this prospect. So, for those that were strongly entrenched in either camp, for or against, some are either breathing a sigh of relief or others, a bit disappointed.
Maybe frustrated,
but, I think a lot of people just say, look, it's an open door, so a lot of people are kind of just keeping their powder dry.
All right, so what happens next now that the document's been released?
Well, so what Pope Francis does in this letter is to really call the world to action. And so this, Cardinal Humes, who presided over the Synod, has asked every single bishop around the world to have their own press conference and their own sort of release and sort of say, what can we do on a local level? So I think that's sort of the first way it will be digested. And of course, on the sort of Roman side of things, we'll await sort of further commissions on the question of deacons, priests, and those bigger questions. But the Pope has said time and time again, he doesn't want those sort of, particular pastoral concerns to obscure the fact that he's really calling the entire world to really care for the people of the Amazon, because what happens there affects everyone.
All right, national correspondent for the Tablet and Crux, Christopher White, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
America's bishops are praising the Pope's words tonight, calling his message a hopeful and challenging vision of the future. Conference President Archbishop Jose Gomez added this about the Holy Father. He also calls all of us in America and throughout the world to examine our style of life and to reflect on the consequences that our decisions have for the environment and the poor. You can read the Pope's entire apostolic exhortation for yourself. It is now on thetablet.org. The news is still breaking. U.S. troops under fire in Syria. The attack on the American convoy erupted when the armored vehicles drove through a village in northeastern Syria. There's no word of any American casualties, but at least one Syrian was killed when the U.S. forces returned fire. Hundreds of American troops are in the area backing up Kurds who are taking on the Islamic State. Now we shift gears and look at the battle for the Democratic presidential nomination. All went smoothly in New Hampshire and the votes were counted last night, but there's still no clear frontrunner. Abby Phillip reports on how the candidates are spinning the results.
This victory here is the beginning of the end for Donald Trump.
With a win in New Hampshire, Senator Bernie Sanders taking control as the Democratic frontrunner.
No matter who wins, and we certainly hope it's going to be us, we are going to unite together and defeat the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country.
But not too far behind him, Pete Buttigieg.
Here in a state that goes by the motto, live free or die, you made up your own minds.
The former South Bend, Indiana mayor earning a strong second-place finish, once again saying he's a great alternative to voters who may see Sanders as too progressive.
Vulnerable Americans do not have the luxury of pursuing ideological purity over an inclusive victory.
Despite winning the popular vote in both Iowa and New Hampshire, Sanders is behind in the overall delegate race by 2.
Hello, America. I'm Amy Klobuchar, and I will beat Donald Trump.
Amy Klobuchar seemingly appealing to the state's moderate and independent voters.
Donald Trump's worst nightmare is that the people in the middle, the people who have had enough of the name-calling and the mudslinging, have someone to vote for in November.
The Minnesota senator ending Tuesday's contest with a surprisingly strong third-place finish and a new attitude.
We've been strong and we've never quit.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, who placed 4th, praised Klobuchar for her performance.
I also want to congratulate my friend and colleague, Amy Klobuchar, for showing just how wrong the pundits can be when they count a woman out.
With a 5th-place finish, Joe Biden left the state even before the votes were counted for South Carolina.
It ain't over, man. We're just getting started.
Eager to quickly put his dismal showings in the first contests behind him.
We just heard from the first 2 of 50 states. Now, where I come from, that's the opening bell, not the closing bell.
But Biden isn't the only candidate looking ahead.
We're going to Nevada. We're going to South Carolina. We're going to win those states as well.
Abby Phillip filing that report. The Nevada caucuses are in a week and a half on February 22nd. President Trump was on the ballot in New Hampshire. He breezed to victory, taking nearly all the votes. Donald Jr. campaigned on his father's behalf. The president is facing no serious opposition to his renomination. And still ahead in this newscast, St. John's University political science professor Brian Brown breaks down these results, lending a Catholic viewpoint, and tells us what it means for the primaries moving forward. That's still ahead in this newscast. Now for the coronavirus crisis, Pope Francis is praying for the thousands of victims in China.
Per I nostri fratelli cinesi.
More than 1,100 Chinese have already died from the virus, with over 45,000 infected. But there is some welcome news. For the second day in a row, the number of new cases dropped. On February 12, 2019, a model New York City police officer crossed paths with a petty criminal. Detective Brian Simonson ended up dead, killed in the line of duty. A year later, the Catholic community just blocks from his precinct and second home came together to remember the life he lived. Currents News' Tim Harfman has the story from Richmond Hill.
A sea of blue in the pews of Holy Child Jesus Church to remember Detective Brian Simonson. The 42-year-old was shot and killed while responding to an armed robbery 1 year ago.
I lost my husband, my best friend, and literally my everything. When I was told Brian was gone, a huge part of me died.
The detective's widow, Leanne, says the pain is still strong. NYPD chaplain Monsignor Robert Romano says the department stands with the Simonsons.
Together as a family, the family of blood and the family of blue, we work together to be with the family today, to reassure them that this department will never forget them.
Showing their support for the 19-year veteran, NYPD Commissioner Dermot Shea and Mayor Bill de Blasio.
I think we, as a society, forget so many things. And one thing we forget is that New York City simply cannot work, does not work, without guardians like Detective Brian Simonson.
Paying their respects to the Guardian, Catholic Academy students from Holy Child Jesus. The Richmond Hill Parish located blocks from Simonson's 102 precinct. Students added to the growing memorial a year ago, and they honor the NYPD each day.
They are a respected part of our community here. They're certainly called to do a lot in our neighborhood.
Remembering a detective called to serve the neighborhood and city, showing he's gone but not forgotten. In Richmond Hill, Queens, Tim Harfman, Currents News.
We're learning tonight that Kobe Bryant and his daughter have been laid to rest. The sports legend and 13-year-old Gianna were among 9 people killed in a helicopter crash last month. They were buried at a Southern California cemetery on Friday, not far from the family's Catholic parish. A public celebration of Kobe's life is set for Los Angeles on February 24th. There's a lot more news headed your way, including this report you'll only see on Currents News.
What sits just beyond this gate and these chains was once the crossroads of freedom. I'm Jessica Easthope, and I'll have the story about how Brooklyn activists are trying to save this home that they say was part of the Underground Railroad.
What's next for Democrats running for president? Political expert Brian Brown is here to tell us. And could this man wind up in City Hall? Maybe. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number 718-517-3122. We'll be right back.
We want to make sure that New Yorkers are reminded of this history of resistance to unjust laws.
ALEAH VAUGHN is talking about this building built in 1848. It's still standing, but soon could be just a pile of rubble. And that would be a shame because activists like Vaughan say the building used to belong to 2 abolitionists who used their home to hide runaway slaves. But a demo permit for 227 Duffield Street has been filed, and the history it holds could be bulldozed to the ground. Currents News' Jessica Easthope has the story from downtown Brooklyn.
Here, this home right here.
Shattered windows, wooden boards, and a crumbling facade. are all part of the Face of Freedom in Brooklyn.
Others were willing to put their lives at risk, their homes at risk, in order to help those people to freedom.
ALEAH VAUGHN is the executive director of the Circle for Justice Innovations. Her work has led her to 227 Duffield Street and its former owners.
We believe very strongly that they also were part of the Underground Railroad. There was an underground tunnel and a connection between this building and the one next door.
Sandwiched between a hotel and a construction site, the 3-story red brick home was owned by prominent abolitionists Harriet and Thomas Truesdell in the early 1850s. Now surrounded by skyscrapers and bustling downtown Brooklyn, Vaughn says the home is in danger of being demolished.
This place and time, the crossroads of freedom, is one that we should be remembering.
Though city agencies claim they have no evidence connecting the home to the Underground Railroad, Duffield Street was co-named Abolitionist Place in 2007. The Landmark Preservation Commission is currently evaluating the home as a potential landmark. Activists say historians have long disputed the city's argument there is no historical significance. One of them is abolition expert Dr. Robert Fanuzzi.
When black people were endangered throughout New York City, they knew to come to Brooklyn.
Not only is the home's significance still relevant after more than 150 years, historians say it solidifies Brooklyn's place in abolitionist history.
It was a network of churches, newspapers, improvement societies, speakers bureaus, and all of that was in Brooklyn.
While the goal is to save the home and have it restored and converted into a museum, Vaughn says preserving this special place is a true way of celebrating Black history this month and always. In downtown Brooklyn, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
There's still no clear Democratic frontrunner in the race for the party's presidential nomination. Although Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg are on top for now, they're facing new challenges in the primaries that are ahead. St. John's University political expert Brian Brown joins us. And Brian, there's a lot of National Democratic Party officials. They're worried over the candidacies of both Sanders and Buttigieg. Some even saying out loud they don't have the stuff to beat President Trump. So what's the party going to do? Throw their weight behind Mike Bloomberg?
It could be.
Yeah.
We're 2 contests into what clearly looks like it's going to be a long primary process, and the Democratic Party is really doing some soul searching. Is it the far left party of Bernie Sanders, who has, won these first 2 primaries by close margins, or is it the Amy Klobuchar, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg sort of moderate centrist, if you will, party of the future?
Now, that was an interesting thing. Amy Klobuchar came in 3rd last night, and she was really happy about that. Could she ride the wave of momentum in the states that are coming up next?
I think she could. She lives to fight another day. She had a very good debate the other night, and debates matter. And I think that, plus the fact that the progressive lane is narrowing in the Democratic Party, but it seems that the non-progressive lane is widening. And Klobuchar has an opening, and she could, stick around for a while as long as she continues to fundraise, which has been a challenge for her.
Right. Now, what about Joe Biden? Is he finished after coming in 5th? He also came in 4th in Iowa.
It's hard to explain. Joe Biden was the clear front runner at one time, but he really needs a win desperately in South Carolina, and that's what he's banking on. And if it doesn't happen, that could be the end of the Biden campaign.
Going back to Bloomberg, what do you think about his strategy of kind of ignoring the early states and just focusing on Super Tuesday?
Well, it's a unique one, but his money and resources will clearly keep him in the race as long as he wants to be in the race. He was never a great retail politician or campaigner, so this idea that he's buying up all the media, it really suits him. Eventually, he's going to have to get out there. Super Tuesday is going to be a very big day for him. But on the other side is, do you want your candidate coming in and essentially buying the nomination process? And if it happens at the expense of Sanders, where do those Sanders voters go? Or do they stay home in November?
Right. And so let's ask you, what do you think your choice for Democratic nominee? Who do you think will come out on top?
I think it's going to be a long process. I really think Super Tuesday will decide it. But again, I don't count out Mike Bloomberg because he has deep pockets and the resources to stick around, and he could make a big difference.
And you think he could beat Donald Trump?
Time will tell. It's still early on that, but imagine 2 New York billionaires going at it, and what will happen? It'll be fun to watch.
Oh, wow, it will be interesting, that's for sure. St. John's University political science professor Brian Brown, thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here.
Andrew Yang dropped out of the race last night, but not before promising that we haven't seen the last of him. That message to New Yorkers in particular. Tonight, there are rumors that the entrepreneur has his sights set on a run for mayor. The Yang gang was riding on Iowa and New Hampshire after he invested millions there. His campaign has yet to address the rumors about a possible takeover of Gracie Mansion. The political calendar is accelerating. The Nevada caucuses are a week from Saturday, followed a week later with the South Carolina primary. Then comes Super Tuesday on March 3rd, when voters in 14 states go to the polls. Count on Currents News for complete coverage of it all. And still to come on Currents News, while we celebrate Black History Month, we look back at the remarkable story of a Christian woman, the last slave in New York. And before we go to break, a programming note about our special series on human trafficking. Tomorrow, advocates share their powerful stories in the fight for justice.
Learning that we're more than our story, right? But also understanding that there's so many different ways that you can enter the movement.
Survivors in a war to end the scourge of modern-day slavery get the last word. The conclusion of our special series, Human Trafficking Exposed, tomorrow on Currents News. Finally tonight, another hidden history right here in New York City. The last slave of New York, a Christian woman who rests in the Diocese of Brooklyn. Currents News' Michelle Powers has her story this Black History Month, one that was only uncovered after cemetery workers discovered her grave.
More than 500,000 people are buried in the heart of Brooklyn.
So it looks like it should be right over here.
Names we may know well.
Leonard Bernstein is one of our most famous people. Horace Greeley, Boss Tweed.
And those time has forgotten. Like the headstone Greenwood Cemetery historian Jeff Richmond leans over now.
Okay, so this is...
It's one he recently found. Margaret Pine, a slave. Sold while still an infant, she belonged to a wealthy family, the Van Zants.
Raising what turned out to be 11 young boys in the family.
After the boys had grown, Margaret wished to leave the family farm in Little Neck, Queens. She wanted to live in the city, working for wages. The Van Zants gave her permission to do so and were willing to free her. Around that time, New York was abolishing slavery, but that's not what she wanted.
And she said, I gave you the best years of my life, and now it is your responsibility to take care of me.
Margaret remained the family's property, so they would still have that legal obligation to take care of her until the day she died at 80 years old. That was in 1857, 30 years after the last slaves in New York were thought to be freed. Now, when the Greenwood team found this grave, it was actually still in the dirt and the grass was growing over it, and they couldn't read it at all. So what they did was they rubbed out the words. They were able to read the inscription.
And then it says slave.
The research team also found an article in a Brooklyn newspaper that spoke of her death and officially named her New York's last slave. But Margaret was more than just property. The newspaper says she was a faithful Christian until her death.
And she was in fact asked where she wanted to be buried. And she said that was really not one of her concerns, that her soul would be separate from any place that she would be interred.
Margaret Pine's obituary concludes, she lived life like a sincere Christian and died like one, cheerful and without a struggle to the last. In Greenwood Cemetery, Michelle Powers, Currents News.
That is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.